Just after midnight, while most of the palace lay cloaked in silence, guards received an untraceable directive: remove everything. She must not know who ordered it. What followed was a quiet yet seismic shift in power within the royal walls, and Camilla had no idea what storm was unfolding behind her back. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The silence of the palace was deceptive. Behind the ancient stone and draped corridors, something unthinkable was taking place, something the public was never meant to know. An internal memo, unsigned and sealed in a plain envelope, was slipped into the hands of a senior royal guard. It carried no insignia, no explanation, just a simple command: clear out all personal effects from the late Queen's former rooms immediately. The Queen Mother's suite, long considered hallowed ground, had been quietly claimed by Camilla following Charles's coronation, a symbolic act that had drawn silent ire from many corners. Now that symbolic hold was being revoked. Guards approached the wing in question with apprehension, noting the unusually tight security restrictions placed around it. The order had not come through traditional palace channels, and no name could be traced to it. Yet those who received it understood the weight behind it, even if they dared not speak it aloud. This was no ordinary cleaning or reorganization, this was a calculated extraction. Within minutes, the once vibrant and curated presence of Camilla was being dismantled, boxed, and removed. Perfumed letters, personal photographs, monogrammed dressing gowns, everything that marked the Queen Consort's intimate claim to those sacred halls was swiftly packed away. There were no whispers, no idle chatter among staff. Only the sound of gloved hands carefully handling objects they never expected to touch. Surveillance systems in the corridor, usually active 24 hours, had been inexplicably blacked out. Security footage from that entire wing simply vanished from the palace servers. Some guards hesitated, even refusing to participate, citing loyalty to their sovereign or perhaps fear of reprisal. Others followed through, rigid with the knowledge that refusal could end careers. But no matter their stance, everyone knew this wasn't just logistics. This was power in motion. The very walls seemed to absorb the tension, as if aware of the political tremor forming beneath them. By the time the sun began to rise over the palace, the rooms once softly humming with Camilla's presence had been wiped clean. No explanation was given. No press release issued. No word from Charles, who conveniently had left for Sandringham the day before. Yet within the quiet panic and confused whispers, two names began circulating among the inner circles: Charles, yes, but louder still, Anne. Her shadow lingered heavily over the operation, though no proof tied her directly. That was the brilliance of it. If it was her, it was done without leaving a single trace. Not even Camilla had been warned. She was still asleep, unaware that by morning, her place in the palace and perhaps the monarchy itself would feel dangerously unsteady. But the quiet removal was only the beginning. What came next shattered royal protocol and exposed cracks within the crown itself. Once belonging to Queen Elizabeth II herself, the rooms Camilla claimed weren't just luxurious, they were symbols of status, legacy, and subtle war. So when she moved in, many saw it as a quiet betrayal. But now, they're being reclaimed. By whom and why? When Camilla first stepped foot into the Queen's private suite, it was meant to mark a new chapter. But within the palace walls, it felt like the end of something sacred. These weren't just rooms, they were hallowed spaces steeped in memory, in legacy, in power that was earned, not inherited by marriage. The backlash began in hushed tones among the staff. Long-serving housekeepers, footmen, and aides who had worked under Elizabeth for decades were left shaken. Many refused to enter the quarters once Camilla moved in. Some went so far as to ask for reassignment. The discomfort wasn't rooted merely in tradition, it was personal. The Queen's former rooms weren't just taken, they were, in their eyes, stolen. Since Charles's coronation, a quiet but unrelenting resentment brewed just below the surface. Staff who had once smiled out of duty now traded glances of disapproval behind Camilla's back. Whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs into soft rebellion. One former valet was overheard saying, "She didn't just redecorate, she erased." That statement circulated faster than the crown could contain. It wasn't just about rugs or portraits. It was about presence. Camilla's presence in those rooms symbolized her perceived conquest of a space that had once been the beating heart of Elizabeth's reign. To some, it felt as if the monarchy itself was being rewritten. But the unrest wasn't isolated to palace staff. Inside royal circles, there were rumors sharp and whispered of disapproval from Catherine, Princess of Wales. Though she never spoke publicly, those close to her claimed she viewed the move as inappropriate and poorly timed. Catherine had been growing in quiet influence, positioning herself as a custodian of Elizabeth's values. Her silence was powerful, her distance even more so. Those watching closely noted that she had not once stepped foot into that wing since Camilla moved in. Was it protest? Was it principle? No one knew for certain, but the message was unmistakable. Then came the leak. A royal historian, known for their closeness to the late Queen's former secretary, released a quote that ignited a new firestorm. It was never hers to take. Though vague, the implication was damning. Whether the quote was genuine or manufactured didn't matter, the damage was done. The public, already divided over Camilla's role, now had a new reason to doubt her legitimacy. The timing of the leak, just days before the midnight removal of her belongings, was too precise to ignore. It suggested planning, coordination, and deep internal resistance. And yet, amid all the fury, one question remained unanswered. Did Charles ever truly approve of Camilla claiming those rooms? Or was he simply too fatigued, too consumed by the crown's weight, to resist? Some insiders suggest he hesitated but caved under pressure. Others say he remained blissfully unaware of the emotional minefield the move would trigger. Whatever the truth, his silence had become a liability. In that silence, others made their moves. Quiet ones. Strategic ones. As whispers turned into quiet action, the real question was who had the authority to reverse Camilla's power without Charles's signature. It wasn't a servant. It wasn't Charles. The instigator was someone no one expected: Princess Anne, the iron-willed royal who had stayed silent too long. And when she finally acted, it was with ruthless precision. Behind the grandeur and gilded smiles of the monarchy lies a quiet battleground, one where tradition isn't just respected, it's weaponized. Princess Anne had watched from the sidelines for far too long. She had tolerated, endured, and swallowed her misgivings with the discipline of a soldier. But her patience had an expiration date. The day Camilla crossed the threshold into their mother's sacred quarters, something inside Anne fractured. For years, she'd carried herself with quiet dignity, often overlooked, underestimated, or treated as a dutiful relic of a bygone age. But Anne was no relic. She was a hawk, and her silence had only made her strike more lethal when it finally came. The move began not with fanfare, but with a single meeting under the cover of darkness. A summons was delivered to a select group of senior palace aides, those with decades of loyalty, not to the current king, but to the memory of Queen Elizabeth. Anne sat at the head of a long, candle-lit table, her expression unreadable. What was discussed in that meeting would never make it into official records. But sources close to the palace confirmed one thing: Anne invoked a clause forgotten by most from a royal covenant drafted in the 1950s. A clause that gave her temporary stewardship over specific parts of the palace in the event of a transitional breach of legacy. It was obscure. It was buried. But it was real. And in that moment, it became the foundation of a royal upheaval. What followed left even the most hardened aides visibly shaken. Anne pulled from her coat a folded piece of cream stationery, and, with a fountain pen that once belonged to her father, wrote 5 chilling words: "Reclaim what's hers." Immediately, there were no names, no dates, no signatures, just a seal, her personal crest, and a silent command. It was passed to the head of internal security with solemn gravity. The guards tasked with carrying out the order were handpicked, not for their strength, but for their loyalty. Each was sworn to silence, their loyalty tested, their emotions barely restrained. Some cried. Others stood frozen. They knew what this meant. They weren't just moving items, they were shifting the monarchy's internal compass. And yet, Camilla's name was never mentioned, not once. That was the masterstroke. Legally, nothing could be proven. Politically, everything could be felt. Every action, every room targeted, every object chosen to be removed at all pointed to one conclusion. Anne had drawn a line in the marble, and Camilla had unknowingly stepped over it. This wasn't an act of petty revenge. It was a surgical reclamation of power, carried out with the cold calculation of someone who had spent her entire life watching history rewrite itself without her consent. But this time, she was the author. But while Anne acted in shadows, Camilla was about to wake to a palace transformed and a war reignited. She opened the door and found emptiness. Gone were her books, her perfumes, her letters from Charles. In their place, cold silence. No explanation. No warning. Only a note left on a cushion: "These walls remember Her Majesty." The air in the corridor felt different that morning. Still, heavy, like it was holding its breath. Camilla had risen earlier than usual, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. But as she pushed open the door to the Queen's former quarters, the room she had come to see as her own, what greeted her wasn't familiarity. It was vacancy. The warmth had vanished. Personal touches she'd curated over the past year: framed photographs, a silk scarf draped over the back of a chair, the faint scent of her favorite lavender perfume, all of it gone. In its place, clinical order. A sterile emptiness. For a moment she stood still, uncomprehending. But then her eyes landed on the cushion. The note was handwritten. No signature. Just that single line. And it cut deeper than any confrontation ever could. The shock took a moment to settle into her bones. Alone in the room, Camilla was silent at first. But what followed behind those closed doors was a symphony of collapse. A senior aide later confided that from the hallway, they heard the muffled sound of something breaking a vase, perhaps. Then sobs. Sharp. Stifled. And then, an eerie quiet before the rage erupted. Orders were barked. Questions were screamed. But none were answered. The staff avoided her gaze. They moved around her like shadows. Careful, cold, mechanical. It was a palace full of people, yet she had never felt more alone. Those who once curtsied with respect now offered only polite detachment. Some turned corners early just to avoid passing her. Something fundamental had shifted, and Camilla could feel it every step, every breath, echoed with betrayal. Desperate for answers, she reached for the one person who could steady her. But Charles was gone. No message. No call. Only a vague itinerary handed to her hours later. On retreat, it said, somewhere in Norfolk. No return date listed. That detail hit harder than expected. He had left before this happened. Or had he known? Was this his way of staying clean while others delivered the blow? The uncertainty was suffocating. The silence between them, louder than any accusation. And in that void, Camilla began to unravel. What had begun as pain soon twisted into something darker. In the privacy of her personal salon, she opened a drawer and pulled out her stationery. Her hand trembled as she wrote. It wasn't just a letter, it was a declaration. A first draft of abdication. She poured her fury into the ink, calling out the betrayals, the humiliation, the cowardice of those who had once stood beside her. She questioned the loyalty of the firm. She even questioned Charles. The letter wasn't complete, but its intention was clear. She was done. Or at least, she believed she was. Until the phone rang. But before she could act, Camilla would receive a chilling call that hinted at a deeper betrayal from within. When Charles returned, he expected peace. Instead, he was handed a storm. Camilla's tears, Anne's silence, and the palace divided. But what broke him most wasn't what happened, it was discovering that perhaps he had allowed it. The moment he stepped through the private entrance, Charles sensed it, an unnatural stillness, the kind that follows upheaval. Aides avoided eye contact. Footsteps felt heavier, and when he found Camilla, she was not the woman he had left. Her eyes were swollen, her voice was hollow, and the fire that had once defined her presence was now replaced by a quiet devastation. She didn't scream, she didn't beg. She simply handed him the note. These walls remember Her Majesty. And for the first time since taking the crown, Charles felt powerless in his own house. Camilla's breakdown hadn't been dramatic, it had been suffocating. Silent. Heart-wrenching. And worst of all, he couldn't explain it, because neither could anyone else. When he demanded answers, he was met with a wall of strategic vagueness. Senior aides spoke in circles, citing operational protocol, shifting blame. pointing subtly in Anne's direction without ever naming her outright. Every time Charles tried to pin someone down, they slipped through. "It must have come from higher up," one whispered. "We assumed it had your blessing," said another. But no one had documentation. No trail, just shadows. It was plausible deniability, executed with surgical brilliance. Charles knew Anne's hand was behind it. Every subtle mark bore her stoic precision. But she had left no fingerprints, only consequences. And so, he did what many would never expect of a king. He hesitated. Confronting Anne wasn't just a matter of family, it was a matter of survival. She wasn't just his sister, she was the crown's quiet enforcer, the keeper of tradition, the last remaining embodiment of their mother's unflinching principles. Facing her would mean facing the ghost of Queen Elizabeth herself. And Charles, already haunted by public scrutiny and private regrets, wasn't ready. Instead, he retreated further inward, just as the walls around him seemed to close in. The monarchy had become a house divided, and he, its figurehead, stood paralyzed at its heart. Catherine's involvement only deepened the fracture. While she never declared it publicly, her private alignment with Anne became apparent. She offered silent strength to those resisting Camilla's rise, presenting herself as the true heir to the late queen's dignity. It wasn't personal, it was strategic. Her vision for the monarchy didn't include blurred lines or improvised titles. She believed in legacy, not accommodation. And Charles saw it clearly now. The future was being reshaped around him, and he had somehow become a passive observer in his own reign. Caught between the woman he loved and the legacy he inherited, Charles unraveled. In a rare moment of raw vulnerability, he retreated to the private chapel, where aides say he sat alone for hours. One recalled hearing him whisper something over and over again. "I promised her I'd protect it." Her was not Camilla. It was his mother. And now, that very memory was tearing his marriage apart, while the public sensed something far more scandalous was brewing. It started with a tweet: "Camilla evicted?" Then a blurry photo of her belongings wheeled down a marble hallway. Within hours, headlines screamed betrayal, and palace phones wouldn't stop ringing. But who leaked the footage, and why? The image spread like wildfire. A lone trunk, heavy and regal, adorned with gold trimming and Camilla's initials, captured mid-removal by an anonymous lens. The grainy quality only added to its mystique. Within minutes, it was on Twitter. Within hours, every major tabloid had splashed it across their front pages. Queen consort ousted? Charles silent amid palace purge. Royal retaliation? The narrative spiraled uncontrollably. Sky News launched into overdrive, speculating on everything from marital breakdowns to secret annulment discussions. And while most media outlets indulged in the frenzy, the BBC stood notably still. No coverage. No headlines. No response. That silence was louder than any headline. It reeked of insider knowledge, of restraint ordered from the very top. Inside the palace, chaos erupted. The press office scrambled to control the narrative, but there was nothing to hold on to. The image had no timestamp, no official record, no verifiable source. It simply existed. But it was enough to break the illusion of control. Guards were pulled in for questioning. Phones were seized. One guard, a junior footman new to the royal rotation, was suspended without explanation. His name never reached the public. But those within the inner circle whispered about him as the scapegoat, not the source. The real leaker, they believed, had access deeper than any footman could dream of. Then came the theory no one dared speak aloud, at least not publicly, that the footage hadn't been leaked to hurt Camilla, but to protect her. A calculated act by someone loyal to her, someone who wanted the world to see what had been done to her in silence. By dragging the palace into the spotlight, they shattered the veil of secrecy and forced the monarchy into a reactive posture. The leak didn't just humiliate the firm, it forced them to respond. And that was precisely the point. But the most chilling twist came not from the media, not from the palace, but from social media. An unlikely post from Queen Elizabeth's former dresser. A cryptic Instagram story, no caption, no explanation, just an old photo of the Queen standing alone in the same hallway where Camilla's trunk had been photographed. The timing was deliberate. The message was unmistakable. Those who had served the late Queen still moved among the shadows, still guarding her legacy, still sending signals to those who dared forget. Camilla, once seen as Charles's constant, now stood as the symbol of disruption and possibly displacement. With the public now gripped in speculation and the palace machinery creaking under pressure, the true question wasn't about what had happened, but what would come next. As the public clamored for truth, what they didn't know was that another figure had just returned, and she held the final key. She never raised her voice. She never made a scene. But behind closed doors, Catherine had been watching, waiting, and aligning pieces on a board no one else knew existed. When she spoke to Anne, it was done. Long before the trunk rolled down the marble hallway, before Camilla stood hollow-eyed in her emptied quarters, Catherine had already seen the end unfold in her mind. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. To her, it was never about titles or curtains. It was about preservation. The monarchy she was preparing for her son to inherit could not afford blurred lines, fractured loyalty, or nostalgia that clashed with modern order. From the moment Charles was crowned, Catherine recognized that Camilla's expanding influence posed a threat not only to the institution's image, but to its long-term survival. And Catherine, with her quiet grace and iron resolve, had no intention of letting George inherit a legacy built on compromise. Weeks before the storm erupted, she met with Anne in a secluded drawing room. No aides, no advisors, just two women bound by loyalty to Elizabeth and a vision of what the crown should be. The conversation was short, direct. Anne did not need persuasion. The two rarely agreed on approach, but in this Camilla's occupation of the Queen's private domain, they were aligned with surgical clarity. Camilla's presence in those rooms was more than disrespectful. It was destabilizing. Anne had the legal leverage, but Catherine had the strategic framing. It wasn't just about removing a person, it was about restoring equilibrium. In the weeks that followed, Catherine remained outwardly unbothered. She attended events, smiled before cameras, and exuded composure. But behind palace walls, she was building influence at an astonishing pace. Charles was preoccupied, the press distracted, and the public hungry for stability. She filled the void with purpose. Senior courtiers began seeking her input before making statements. Staff gradually drifted into her orbit. Even longtime royal loyalists began deferring to her, sensing where the true future of the monarchy was taking shape. She did not issue commands. She made suggestions, quiet ones, timed perfectly, impossible to ignore. And then came the night before. A single conversation with Anne. No documents were exchanged. No instructions delivered. Just a look. A nod. The kind of moment that rewrites history without saying a word. By morning, the wheels were already in motion. The guards who executed the removal didn't know who authorized it. They only knew the directive was absolute and unchallengeable. Catherine didn't need to witness it. She already knew how it would unfold. It wasn't personal. It was tactical, symbolic, surgical. The message wasn't just to Camilla, it was to the institution, the staff, the public. The Queen's memory would not be replaced. Not while Catherine stood watch. Yet even in all her precision, she had overlooked one critical variable. Camilla was wounded. Yes, but she was not broken. And while Catherine pulled strings behind the curtain, the one person she underestimated was preparing her own final act of defiance. Camilla had been pushed, humiliated, and erased. But she wasn't leaving quietly. Her handwritten letter filled with veiled threats, raw truths, and one damning accusation would never be mailed. Instead, it was leaked. The pen hovered over the page longer than anyone would have expected. This wasn't impulse. This was reckoning. Camilla wrote in long, deliberate strokes, each word pressed hard into the paper, as if she needed the ink to remember what the palace was trying to forget. The letter was addressed to Charles alone, intimate in tone but unforgiving in substance. She wrote not as a queen consort, not as a political figure, but as a woman who believed she had paid every price demanded of her and was still being punished. The opening lines were restrained, almost tender. But that restraint didn't last. Midway through, the letter sharpened. One paragraph stood out, heavy with implication. She accused the young queen of orchestrating a quiet coup, of manipulating tradition while hiding behind courtesy and silence. No names were written, but the target was unmistakable. Camilla claimed the monarchy was being steered not by the crown, but by calculation. That power had shifted behind Charles's back. That loyalty was being rewarded selectively. It was the most dangerous kind of accusation, not loud enough to dismiss, not clear enough to confront, but explosive if ever exposed. As the pages piled up, her intention became undeniable. Camilla was preparing to leave. Permanently. She wrote of moving out, of retreating from public duties, of reclaiming a private life that had cost her everything to abandon in the first place. But woven into that vulnerability was something colder. A warning. A suggestion that she held stories the palace would never survive if spoken aloud. Conversations. Promises. Compromises made in dark rooms and quieter years. She never listed them. She didn't need to. The implication alone was enough to freeze blood. The letter was never sealed. Never delivered. Somewhere between her desk and Charles's private correspondence, it was intercepted. No one knows by whom. Not an aide. Not security. Someone closer. Someone with access and motive. By the next morning, copies existed where they shouldn't. Not publicly yet, but in the hands of those who understood leverage. When Charles finally read it, witnesses say he didn't speak. He sat motionless, eyes fixed on the page long after the final sentence ended. Whatever he saw there shook him deeper than the removal of rooms ever could. Anne, by contrast, was unmoved. When informed of the letter's contents, she reportedly responded with a single sentence. Then she should have known the cost. The palace tightened instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones went unanswered. Everyone understood the line had been crossed. Camilla had fired her last shot not with a speech, not with an interview, but with words never meant for daylight. And now, those words were alive, circulating, mutating, waiting. As the monarchy reeled from the fallout, one unexpected figure reappeared bearing the final word, and shaking the royal house to its core. He had been invisible for years, a shadow in corridors. But now, a royal footman steps forward claiming he witnessed a promise made by Queen Elizabeth herself, a promise that would explain everything. His name had never made headlines. He had served through decades of transitions, never stepping outside the palace's hush of discretion. But in the chaos that followed Camilla's silent removal, one voice emerged from the depths of royal obscurity, a now retired footman, elderly and frail, but razor-sharp in memory. What he revealed didn't come in a sensational interview or a tearful confession. It came in a signed affidavit, submitted quietly to a royal biographer known for chronicling the monarchy's darkest winters. The footman claimed that in the final years of Queen Elizabeth's reign, he had overheard a private conversation, one that now reframed everything the public thought they understood. According to his sworn testimony, the late Queen had summoned Princess Anne during a private family retreat. The Queen's voice, though weakened by age, was firm with intent. She instructed Anne to preserve the crown at all costs. But it wasn't a vague platitude. The footman swore that what followed was detailed and pointed. Elizabeth had expressed concern, deep, serious concern about Camilla's expanding presence within the royal structure. Not her role beside Charles, but her symbolic encroachment on the legacy Elizabeth had spent her life building. The Queen reportedly warned that the monarchy must never become a battlefield of blurred lines and personal indulgence. Anne, stoic and loyal to a fault, gave no visible response that day. But now, years later, the meaning of her silence had surfaced with haunting clarity. What stunned the inner circle even more was the footman's claim that Charles had once agreed to conditions spoken, but never documented. That Camilla's role would remain supportive, not sovereign. That certain spaces such as the Queen's private quarters would remain untouched. That the new reign would not seek to overwrite the last. Yet somewhere along the way, those boundaries had vanished. Whether by forgetfulness or ambition, Charles had ignored the quiet pact. And by doing so, he had provoked the very reckoning that now engulfed him. The biographer, trusted by the firm yet respected for his independence, released a carefully worded article. It didn't name the footman, but quoted the testimony directly. The words echoed like thunder through the palace halls. The Queen was clear. Her legacy was not to be overwritten. Her space was not to be shared. Public reaction was immediate and divided. Some called it fabricated. Others believed it instinctively. But one thing was certain: the timing was too precise to dismiss. Suddenly, the removal of Camilla's belongings wasn't seen as petty or political. It was recast as fulfillment. A final act of obedience to a monarch who ruled from beyond the grave. In one chilling stroke, the narrative flipped. What had appeared as a cold-hearted ousting was now cloaked in royal duty, steeped in promises whispered in twilight. Anne's silence made sense. Catherine's involvement gained weight, and Charles's hesitation looked more like guilt than indecision. Every player had acted on something bigger than pride. They were executing a queen's final wish. And so, the removal of a few belongings became the spark for a reckoning, one that may redefine loyalty, love, and power within the British royal family forever. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.